Section 5 of Steppenwolf by Hermann Hesse. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Harry Haller's Records, Part 4. Just as the gramophone contaminated the aesthetic and intellectual atmosphere of my study, and just as the American dances broke in as strangers and disturbers, yes, and as destroyers, into my carefully tended garden of music, so too from all sides there broke in new and dreaded and disintegrating influences upon my life that till now had been so sharply marked off and so deeply secluded. The Steppenwolf treatise, and Herman too, were right in their doctrine of the 1,000 souls. Every day new souls kept springing up beside the host of old ones, making clamorous demands and creating confusion. And now I saw as clearly as in a picture what an illusion my former personality had been. The few capacities and pursuits in which I had happened to be strong had occupied all my attention, and I had painted a picture of myself as a person who was, in fact, nothing more than a most refined and educated specialist in poetry, music, and philosophy. And as such I had lived, leaving all the rest of me to be a chaos of potentialities, instincts, and impulses, which I found an encumbrance and gave the label of Steppenwolf. Meanwhile, though cured of an illusion, I found this disintegration of the personality by no means a pleasant and amusing adventure. On the contrary, it was often exceedingly painful, often almost intolerable. Often the sound of the gramophone was truly fiendish to my ears in the midst of surroundings where everything was tuned to so very different a key. And many a time, when I danced my one step in a stylish restaurant among pleasure-seekers and elegant rakes, I felt that I was a traitor to all that I was bound to hold most sacred. Had Herman left me for 1 week alone, I should have fled at once from this wearisome and laughable trafficking with the world of pleasure. Herman, however, was always there. Though I might not see her every day, I was all the same continually under her eye, guided, guarded, and counseled. Besides, she read all my mad thoughts of rebellion and escape in my face and smiled at them. As the destruction of all that I had called my personality went on, I began to understand, too, why it was that I had feared death so horribly in spite of all my despair. I began to perceive that this ignoble horror in the face of death was a part of my old conventional and lying existence. The late Herr Haller, gifted writer, student of Mozart and Goethe, author of essays upon the metaphysics of art, upon genius and tragedy and humanity, the melancholy hermit in a cell encumbered with books, was given over bit by bit to self-criticism, and at every point was found wanting. This gifted and interesting Herr Haller had, to be sure, preached reason and humanity, and had protested against the barbarity of the war. But he had not let himself be stood against a wall and shot, as the proper consequence of his way of thinking would have been. He had found some way of accommodating himself, one, of course, that was outwardly reputable and noble, but still a compromise and no more. He was, further, opposed to the power of capital, and yet he had industrial securities lying at his bank and spent the interest from them without a pang of conscience. And so it was all through. Harry Haller had, to be sure, rigged himself out finely as an idealist and condemner of the world, as a melancholy hermit and growling prophet. At bottom, however, he was a bourgeois who took exception to a life like Herman's and fretted himself over the nights thrown away in a restaurant and the money squandered there, and had them on his conscience. Instead of longing to be freed and completed, he longed, on the contrary, most earnestly to get back to those happy times when his intellectual trifling had been his diversion and brought him fame. Just so those newspaper readers, whom he despised and scorned, longed to get back to the ideal time before the war, because it was so much more comfortable than taking a lesson from those who had gone through it. Oh, the devil, he made one sick, this Herr Haller, and yet I clung to him all the same, or to the mask of him that was already falling away, clung to his coquetting with the spiritual, to his bourgeois horror of the disorderly and accidental, to which death too belonged, and compared the new Harry, the somewhat timid and ludicrous dilettante of the dance-rooms, scornfully and enviously with the old one in whose ideal and lying portrait he had since discovered all those fatal characteristics which had upset him that night so grievously in the professor's print of Goethe. He himself, the old Harry, had been just such a bourgeois idealization of Goethe, a spirit champion whose all-too-noble gaze shone with the unction of elevated thought and humanity, until he was almost overcome by his own nobleness of mind. The devil! Now at last this fine picture stood badly in need of repairs. The ideal Herr Haller had been lamentably dismantled. He looked like a dignitary who had fallen among thieves, with his tattered breeches, and he would have shown sense if he had studied now the role that his rags appointed him, instead of wearing them with an air of respectability and carrying a whining pretense to lost repute. I was constantly finding myself in the company of Pablo the musician, and my estimate of him had to be revised, if only because Hermann liked him so much and was so eager for his company. Pablo had left on me the impression of a pretty nonentity, a little beau, and somewhat empty at that, as happy as a child for whom there are no problems, whose joy it is to dribble into his toy trumpet, and who is kept quiet with praises and chocolate. Pablo, however, was not interested in my opinions. They were as indifferent to him as my musical theories. He listened with friendly courtesy, smiling as he always did, but he refrained all the same from any actual reply. On the other hand, in spite of this, it seemed that I had aroused his interest. It was clear that he put himself out to please me and to show me good will. Once, when I showed a certain irritation, and even ill humor, over one of these fruitless attempts at conversation, he looked in my face with a troubled and sorrowful air, and, taking my left hand and stroking it, he offered me a pinch from his little gold snuff-box. It would do me good. I looked inquiringly at Hermann. She nodded, and I took a pinch. The almost immediate effect was that I became clearer in the head and more cheerful. No doubt there was cocaine in the powder. Hermann told me that Pablo had many such drugs, and that he procured them through secret channels. He offered them to his friends now and then, and was a master in the mixing and prescribing of them. He had drugs for stilling pain, for inducing sleep, for begetting beautiful dreams, lively spirits, and the passion of love. One day I met him in the street near the quay, and he turned at once to accompany me. This time I succeeded at last in making him talk. "Herr Pablo," I said to him as he played with his slender ebony and silver walking stick, "you're a friend of Hermann's, and that is why I take an interest in you, but I can't say you make it easy to get on with you. Several times I have attempted to talk about music with you. It would have interested me to know your thoughts and opinions, whether they contradicted mine or not, but you have disdained to make me even the barest reply." He gave me a most amiable smile, and this time a reply was accorded me. "Well," he said with equanimity, "you see, in my opinion, there is no point at all in talking about music. I never talk about music. What reply, then, was I to make to your very able and just remarks? You were perfectly right in all you said. But you see, I am a musician, not a professor, and I don't believe that, as regards music, there is the least point in being right. Music does not depend on being right, on having good taste and education and all that." "Indeed? Then what does it depend on?" "On making music, Herr Haller. On making music as well and as much as possible, and with all the intensity of which one is capable. That is the point, monsieur. Though I carried the complete works of Bach and Haydn in my head, and could say the cleverest things about them, not a soul would be the better for it. But when I take hold of my mouthpiece and play a lively shimmy, whether the shimmy be good or bad, it will give people pleasure. It gets into their legs and into their blood. That's the point in that alone. Look at the faces in a dance hall at the moment when the music strikes up after a longish pause. How eyes sparkle, legs twitch, and faces begin to laugh. That is why one makes music." "Very good, Herr Pablo. But there is not only sensual music. There is spiritual also. Besides the music that is actually played at the moment, there is the immortal music that lives on even when it is not actually being played. It can happen to a man to lie alone in bed and to call to mind a melody from the magic flute or the Matthew Passion. And then there is music without anybody blowing into a flute or passing a bow across a fiddle." "Certainly, Herr Haller. Yearning and Valencia are recalled every night by many a lonely dreamer. Even the poorest typist in her office has the latest one step in her head and taps her keys in time to it. You are right. I don't grudge all those lonely persons their mute music, whether it's yearning or the magic flute or Valencia. But where do they get their lonely and mute music from? They get it from us, the musicians. It must first have been played and heard. It must have got into the blood before anyone at home in his room can think of it and dream of it. Granted, I said coolly. All the same, it won't do to put Mozart and the latest foxtrot on the same level, and it is not one and the same thing whether you play people divine and eternal music or cheap stuff of the day that is forgotten tomorrow. When Pablo observed from my tone that I was getting heated, he at once put on his most amiable expression, and, touching my arm caressingly, he gave an unbelievable softness to his voice. "Ah, my dear sir, you may be perfectly right with your levels. I have nothing to say to your putting Mozart and Haydn and Valencia on what levels you please. It is all one to me. It is not for me to decide about levels. I shall never be asked about them. Mozart, perhaps, will still be played in 100 years, and Valencia and two will be played no more. We can well leave that, I think, in God's hands. God is good, and has the span of all our days in his hands, and that of every waltz and foxtrot, too. He is sure to do what is right. We musicians, however, we must play our parts according to our duties and our gifts. We have to play what is actually in demand, and we have to play it as well and as beautifully and as expressively as ever we can." With a sigh, I gave it up. There was no getting past the fellow. At many moments the old and the new, pain and pleasure, fear and joy, were quite oddly mixed with one another. Now I was in heaven, now in hell, generally in both at once. The old Harry and the new lived at one moment in bitter strife, at the next in peace. Many a time the old Harry appeared to be dead and done with, to have died and been buried, and then of a sudden there he was again, giving orders and tyrannizing, and contradictory till the little new young Harry was silent for very shame, and let himself be pushed to the wall. At other times the young Harry took the old by the throat, and squeezed with all his might. There was many a groan, many a death struggle, many a thought of the razor blade. Often, however, suffering and happiness broke over me in one wave. One such moment was when, a few days after my first public exhibition of dancing, I went into my bedroom at night, and to my indescribable astonishment, dismay, horror, and enchantment, found the lovely Maria lying in my bed. Of all the surprises that Hermann had prepared for me, this was the most violent, for I had not a moment's doubt that it was she who had sent me this bird of paradise. I had not, as usually, been with Hermann that evening. I had been to a recital of old church music in the cathedral, a beautiful, though melancholy excursion into my past life, to the fields of my youth, the territory of my ideal self. Beneath the lofty Gothic of the church, whose netted vaulting swayed with a ghostly life in the play of the sparse lights, I heard pieces by Buxtehude, Pachelbel, Bach, and Haydn. I had gone the old beloved way once more. I had heard the magnificent voice of a Bach singer with whom, in the old days when we were friends, I had enjoyed many a memorable musical occasion. The notes of the old music, with its eternal dignity and sanctity, had called to life all the exalted enchantment and enthusiasm of youth. I had sat in the lofty choir, sad and abstracted, a guest for an hour of this noble and blessed world which once had been my home. During a Haydn duet, the tears had come suddenly to my eyes. I had not waited for the end of the concert. Dropping the thought I had had of seeing the singer again, what evenings I had once spent with the artistes after such concerts, and stealing away out of the cathedral, I had warily paced the dark and narrow streets, where here and there, behind the windows of the restaurants, jazz orchestras were playing the tunes of the life I had now come to live. Oh, what a dull maze of error I had made of my life! For long during this night's walk I had reflected upon the significance of my relation to music, and not for the first time recognized this appealing and fatal relation as the destiny of the entire German spirit. In the German spirit, the matriarchal link with nature rules in the form of the hegemony of music to an extent unknown in any other people. We intellectuals, instead of opposing ourselves to this tendency like men, and rendering obedience to the spirit, the logos, the word, and gaining a hearing for it, are all dreaming of a speech without words that utters the inexpressible and gives form to the formless. Instead of playing his part as truly and honestly as he could, the German intellectual has constantly rebelled against the word and against reason in courted music. And so German spirit, carousing in music, in wonderful creations of sound, and wonderful beauties of feeling and mood that were never pressed home to reality, has left the greater part of its practical gifts to decay. None of us intellectuals is at home in reality. We are strange to it and hostile. That is why the part played by intellect even in our own German reality, in our history and politics and public opinion, has been so lamentable a one. Well, I had often pondered all this, not without an intense longing sometimes to turn to and do something real for once, to be seriously and responsibly active instead of occupying myself forever with nothing but aesthetics and intellectual and artistic pursuits. It always ended, however, in resignation, in surrender to destiny. The generals and the captains of industry were quite right. There was nothing to be made of us intellectuals. We were a superfluous, irresponsible lot of talented chatterboxes for whom reality had no meaning. With a curse, I came back to the razor. So, full of thoughts and the echoes of the music, my heart weighed down with sadness and the longing of despair for life and reality and sense and all that was irretrievably lost. I had got home at last, climbed my stairs, put on the light in my sitting room, tried in vain to read, thought of the appointment which compelled me to drink whiskey and dance at the Cecil Bar on the following evening, thought with malice and bitterness not only of myself but of Herman too. She might be good and have the best and kindest intentions, and she might be a wonderful person, but she would have done better all the same to let me go to perdition, instead of sweeping me into this whirligig of frivolities where I should never be any other than an alien, and where the best in me was demoralized and had been lowered. And so I had sadly put out the light and taken myself to my bedroom, and sadly begun to undress. And then I was surprised by an unaccustomed smell. There was a faint aroma of scent, and looking round I saw the lovely Maria lying in my bed, smiling and a little startled, with large blue eyes. "Maria," I said, and my first thoughts were that my landlady would give me notice when she knew of it. "I've come," she said softly. "Are you angry with me?" "No, no. I see Herman gave you the key. Isn't that it?" "Oh, it does make you angry. I'll go again." "No, lovely Maria, stay. Only just tonight. I'm very sad. I can't be jolly tonight. Perhaps tomorrow I'll be better again." I was bending over her, and she took my head in her large firm hands, and, drawing it down, gave me a long kiss. Then I sat down on the bed beside her, and took her hands and asked her to speak low, in case we were heard, and looked at her beautiful, full, round face that lay so strangely and wonderfully on my pillow, like a large flower. She drew my hand slowly to her lips, and laid it beneath the clothes on her warm and evenly breathing breast. "You don't need to be jolly," she said. "Herman told you that you had troubles. Anyone can understand that. Tell me, then, do I please you still? The other day when we were dancing, you were very much in love with me." I kissed her eyes, her mouth and neck and breasts. A moment ago I had thought of Herman with bitterness and reproach. Now I held her gift in my hands and was thankful. Maria's caresses did not harm the wonderful music I had heard that evening. They were its worthy fulfillment. Slowly I drew the clothes from her lovely body till my kisses reached her feet. When I lay down beside her, her flower face smiled back at me, omniscient and bountiful. During this night by Maria's side I did not sleep much, but my sleep was as deep and peaceful as a child's. And between sleeping I drank of her beautiful warm youth and heard, as we talked softly, a number of curious tales about her life and Herman's. I had never known much of this side of life. Only in the theatrical world, occasionally, in earlier years, had I come across similar existences, women as well as men who lived half for art and half for pleasure. Now, for the first time, I had a glimpse into this kind of life, remarkable alike for its singular innocence and singular corruption. These girls, mostly from poor homes, but too intelligent and too pretty to give their whole lives to some ill-paid and joyless way of gaining their living, all lived sometimes on casual work, sometimes on their charm and easy virtue. Now and then, for a month or two, they sat at a typewriter. At times were the mistresses of well-to-do men of the world, receiving pocket money and presents, lived at times in furs and motor cars, at other times in attics. And though a good offer might under some circumstances induce them to marry, they were not at all eager for it. Many of them had little inclination for love, and gave themselves very unwillingly, and then only for money, and at the highest price. Others, and Maria was one of them, were unusually gifted in love, and unable to do without it. They lived solely for love, and besides their official and lucrative friends, had other love affairs as well. Assiduous and busy, care-ridden and light-hearted, intelligent and yet thoughtless, these butterflies lived a life at once childlike and raffiné, independent, not to be bought by everyone, finding their account in good luck and fine weather, in love with life and yet clinging to it far less than the bourgeois, always ready to follow a fairy prince to his castle, always certain, though scarcely conscious of it, that a difficult and sad end was in store for them. During that wonderful first night and the days that followed, Maria taught me much. She taught me the charming play and delights of the senses, but she gave me also new understanding, new insight, new love. The world of the dance and pleasure resorts, the cinemas, bars and hotel lounges that for me, the hermit and aesthete, had always about it something trivial, forbidden, and degrading, was for Maria and Hermann and their companions the world pure and simple. It was neither good nor bad, neither loved nor hated. In this world their brief and eager lives flowered and faded. They were at home in it, and knew all its ways. They loved a champagne or a special dish at a restaurant, as one of us might a composer or poet. And they lavished the same enthusiasm and rapture and emotion on the latest craze in dances or the sentimental cloying song of a jazz singer, as one of us on Nietzsche or Hampson. Maria talked to me about the handsome saxophone player Pablo, and spoke of an American song that he had sung them sometimes. And she was so carried away with admiration and love as she spoke of it that I was far more moved and impressed than by the ecstasies of any highly cultured person over artistic pleasures of the rarest and most distinguished quality. I was ready to enthuse in sympathy, be the song what it might. Maria's glowing words and her eager, effusive face made large rents in my aesthetics. There was, to be sure, a beauty, one and indivisible, small and select, that seemed to me, with Mozart at the top, to be above all dispute and doubt. But where was the limit? Hadn't we all, as connoisseurs and critics, in our youth been consumed with love for works of art, and for artists that today we regarded with doubt and dismay? Hadn't that happened to us with Liszt and Wagner, and to many of us even with Beethoven? Wasn't the blossoming of Maria's childish emotion over the song from America just as pure and beautiful an artistic experience, and exalted as far beyond doubt as the rapture of any academic bigwig over Tristan or the ecstasy of a conductor over the Ninth Symphony? And didn't this agree remarkably well with the views of Herr Pablo and prove him right? Maria, too, appeared to love the beautiful Pablo extremely. "He certainly is a beauty," said I. "I like him very much, too. But tell me, Maria, how can you have a fondness for me as well? A tiresome old fellow with no looks, who even has gray hairs and doesn't play a saxophone and doesn't sing any English love songs." "Don't talk so horribly," she scolded. "It is quite natural. I like you, too. You, too, have something nice about you that endears you and marks you out. I wouldn't have you different. One oughtn't to talk of these things and want them accounted for. Listen, when you kiss my neck or my ear, I feel that I please you, and that you like me. You have a way of kissing as though you were shy, and that tells me you please him. He is grateful to you for being pretty. That gives me great, great pleasure. And then again, with another man, it's just the opposite that pleases me, that he kisses me as though he thought little of me and conferred a favor." Again we fell asleep, and again I awoke to find my arm still about her, my beautiful, beautiful flower. And this beautiful flower, strange to say, continued to be none the less the gift that Hermann had made me. Hermann continued to stand in front of her, and to hide her with a mask. Then suddenly the thought of Erica intervened. My distant, angry love, my poor friend. She was hardly less pretty than Maria, even though not so blooming, and she was more constrained and not so richly endowed in the little arts of making love. She stood a moment before my eyes, clearly and painfully, loved and deeply woven into my destiny, then fell away again in a deep oblivion at a half-regretted distance. And so, in the tender beauty of the night, many pictures of my life rose before me, who for so long had lived in a poor pictureless vacancy. Now, at the magic touch of Eros, the source of them was opened up and flowed in plenty. For moments together my heart stood still between delight and sorrow to find how rich was the gallery of my life, and how thronged the soul of the wretched Steppenwolf, with high eternal stars and constellations. My childhood and my mother showed in a tender transfiguration like a distant glimpse over mountains into the fathomless blue. The litany of my friendships, beginning with the legendary Herman, sole brother of Herman, rang out as clear as trumpets. The images of many women floated by with me in unearthly fragrance like moist sea flowers on the surface of the water. Women whom I had loved, desired, and sung, whose love I had seldom won and seldom striven to win. My wife, too, appeared. I had lived with her many years, and she had taught me comradeship, strife, and resignation. In spite of all the shortcomings of our life, my confidence in her remained untouched up to the very day when she broke out against me and deserted me without warning, sick as I was in mind and body. And now, as I looked back, I saw how deep my love and trust must have been for her betrayal to have inflicted so deep and lifelong a wound. These pictures, there were hundreds of them, with names and without, all came back. They rose fresh and new out of this night of love, and I knew again what in my wretchedness I had forgotten, that they were my life's possession and all its worth. Indestructible and abiding as the stars, these experiences, though forgotten, could never be erased. Their series was the story of my life, their starry light the undying value of my being. My life had become weariness. It had wandered in a maze of unhappiness that led to renunciation and nothingness. It was bitter with the salt of all human things, yet it had laid up riches, riches to be proud of. It had been, for all its wretchedness, a princely life. Let the little way to death be as it might, the kernel of this life of mine was noble. It had purpose and character, and turned not on trifles but on the stars. Time has passed and much has happened, much has changed, and I can only remember a little of all that passed that night, a little of all we said and did in the deep tenderness of love, a few moments of clear awakening from the deep sleep of love's weariness. That night, however, for the first time since my downfall, gave me back the unrelenting radiance of my own life, and made me recognize chance's destiny once more and see the ruins of my being as fragments of the divine. My soul breathed once more. My eyes were opened. There were moments when I felt with a glow that I had only to snatch up my scattered images and raise my life as Harry Hauler and as the Steppenwolf to the unity of one picture, in order to enter myself into the world of imagination and be immortal. Was not this, then, the goal set for the progress of every human life? In the morning, after we had shared breakfast, I had to smuggle Maria from the house. Later in the same day, I took a little room in a neighboring quarter, which was designed solely for our meetings. True to her duties, Herman, my dancing mistress, appeared, and I had to learn the Boston. She was firm and inexorable, and would not release me from a single lesson, for it was decided that I was to attend the fancy dress ball in her company. She had asked me for money for her costume, but she refused to tell me anything about it. To visit her, or even to know where she lived, was still forbidden me. This time, about 3 weeks before the fancy dress ball, was remarkable for its wonderful happiness. Maria seemed to me to be the first woman I had ever really loved. I had always wanted mind and culture in the women I had loved, and I had never remarked that even the most intellectual and, comparatively speaking, educated woman never gave any response to the logos in me, but rather constantly opposed it. I took my problems and my thoughts with me to the company of women, and it would have seemed to me utterly impossible to love a girl for more than an hour who had scarcely read a book, scarcely knew what reading was, and could not have distinguished Tchaikovsky from Beethoven. Maria had no education. She had no need of these circuitous substitutes. Her problems all sprang directly from the senses. All her art and the whole task she set herself lay in extracting the utmost delight from the senses she had been endowed with, and from her particular figure, her color, her hair, her voice, her skin, her temperament. And in employing every faculty, every curve and line, and every softest modeling of her body to find responsive perceptions in her lovers, and to conjure up in them an answering quickness of delight. The first shy dance I had had with her had already told me this much. I had caught the scent and the charm of a brilliant and carefully cultivated sensibility, and had been enchanted by it. Certainly, too, it was no accident that Hermann, the all-knowing, introduced me to this Maria. She had the scent and the very significance of summer and of roses. It was not my fortune to be Maria's only lover, nor even her favorite one. I was one of many. Often she had no time for me, often only an hour at midday, seldom at night. She took no money from me. Hermann saw to that. She was glad of presents, however, and when I gave her perhaps a new little purse of red lacquered leather, there might be 2 or 3 gold pieces inside it. As a matter of fact, she laughed at me over the red purse. It was charming, but a bargain, and no longer in fashion. In these matters, about which up to that time I was as little learned as in any language of the Eskimo, I learned a great deal from Maria. Before all else, I learned that these playthings were not mere idle trifles invented by manufacturers and dealers for the purposes of gain. They were, on the contrary, a little, or rather, a big world, authoritative and beautiful, many-sided, containing a multiplicity of things, all of which had the one and only aim of serving love, refining the senses, giving life to the dead world around us, endowing it in a magical way with new instruments of love. From powder and scent to the dancing show, from ring to cigarette case, from waist-buckle to handbag. This bag was no bag, this purse was no purse, flowers no flowers, the fan no fan. All were the plastic material of love, of magic and delight. Each was a messenger, a smuggler, a weapon, a battle-cry. I often wondered who it was whom Maria really loved. I think she loved the young Pablo of the saxophone, with his melancholy black eyes and his long, white, distinguished, melancholy hands. I should have thought Pablo a somewhat sleepy lover, spoilt and passive, but Maria assured me that though it took a long time to wake him up, he was then more strenuous and forward and virile than prize-fighter or riding-master. In this way I got to know many secrets about this person and that, jazz musicians, actors, and many of the women and girls and men of our circle. I saw beneath the surface of the various alliances and enmities, and by degrees, though I had been such an entire stranger to this world, I was drawn in and treated with confidence. I learned a good deal about Hermann, too. It was of Herr Pablo, however, of whom Maria was fond, that I saw the most. At times, she too availed herself of his secret drugs, and was forever procuring these delights for me also. And Pablo was always most markedly on the alert to be of service to me. Once he said to me without more ado, "You are so very unhappy. That is bad. One shouldn't be like that. It makes me sorry. Try a mild pipe of opium." My opinion of this jolly, intelligent, childlike, and at the same time unfathomable person gradually changed. We became friends, and I often took some of his specifics. He looked on at my affair with Maria with some amusement. Once he entertained us in his room on the top floor of a hotel in the suburbs. There was only one chair, so Maria and I had to sit on the bed. He gave us a drink from 3 little bottles, a mysterious and wonderful draught. And then, when I had got into a very good humor, he proposed, with beaming eyes, to celebrate a love orgy for 3. I declined abruptly. Such a thing was inconceivable to me. Nevertheless, I stole a glance at Maria to see how she took it, and though she at once backed up my refusal, I saw the gleam in her eyes and observed that the renunciation cost her some regret. Pablo was disappointed by my refusal, but not hurt. "Pity," he said. "Harry is too morally minded. Nothing to be done. All the same, it would have been so beautiful. So very beautiful. But I've got another idea." He gave us each a little opium to smoke, and sitting motionless with open eyes, we all 3 lived through the scenes that he suggested to us, while Maria trembled with delight. As I felt a little unwell after this, Pablo laid me on the bed and gave me some drops, and while I lay with closed eyes, I felt the fleeting breath of a kiss on each eyelid. I took the kiss as though I believed it came from Maria, but I knew very well it came from him. And one evening he surprised me still more. Coming to me in my room, he told me that he needed 20 francs and would I oblige him. In return, he offered that I, instead of him, should have Maria for the night. "Pablo," I said, very much shocked, "you don't know what you say. Barter for a woman is counted among us as the last degradation. I have not heard your proposal, Pablo." He looked at me with pity. "You don't want to, Harry. Very good. You're always making difficulties for yourself. Don't sleep tonight with Maria if you would rather not, but give me the money all the same. You shall have it back. I have urgent need of it." "What for?" "For Agostino, the little second violin, you know. He has been ill for a week, and there's no one to look after him. He hasn't a sou, nor have I at the moment." From curiosity, and also partly to punish myself, I went with him to Agostino. He took milk and medicine to him in his attic, and a wretched one it was. He made his bed and aired the room, and made a most professional compress for the fevered head, all quickly and gently and efficiently, like a good sick nurse. The same evening I saw him playing till dawn in the city bar. I often talked at length and in detail about Maria with Hermann, about her hands and shoulders and hips, and her way of laughing and kissing and dancing. "Has she shown you this?" asked Hermann on one occasion, describing to me a peculiar play of the tongue and kissing. I asked her to show it me herself, but she was most earnest in her refusal. "That is for later. I am not your love yet." I asked her how she was acquainted with Maria's ways of kissing, and with many secrets as well that could be known only to her lovers. "Oh," she cried, "we're friends after all. Do you think we'd have secrets from one another? I must say you've got hold of a beautiful girl. There's no one like her." "All the same, Hermann, I'm sure you have some secrets from each other, or have you told her everything you know about me?" "No, that's another matter. Those are things she would not understand. Maria is wonderful. You are fortunate. But between you and me there are things she has not a notion of. Naturally, I told her a lot about you, much more than you would have liked at the time. I had to win her for you, you see. But neither Maria nor anyone else will ever understand you as I understand you. I've learnt something about you from her besides, for she's told me all about you as far as she knows you at all. I know you nearly as well as if we had often slept together." It was curious and mysterious to know, when I was with Maria again, that she had had Hermann in her arms just as she had had me. New, indirect, and complicated relations rose before me, new possibilities in love and life, and I thought of the 1,000 souls of the Steppenwolf treatise. In the short interval between the time that I got to know Maria and the fancy dress ball, I was really happy, and yet I never had the feeling that this was my release and the attainment of felicity. I had the distinct impression, rather, that all this was a prelude and a preparation, that everything was pushing eagerly forward, that the gist of the matter was to come. I was now so proficient in dancing that I felt quite equal to playing my part at the ball of which everybody was talking. Hermann had a secret. She took the greatest care not to let out what her costume was to be. I would recognize her soon enough, she said, and should I fail to do so, she would help me. But beforehand I was to know nothing. She was not in the least inquisitive to know my plans for a fancy dress, and I decided that I should not wear a costume at all. Maria, when I asked her to go with me as my partner, explained that she had a cavalier already, and a ticket too, in fact. And I saw with some disappointment that I should have to attend the festivity alone. It was the principal fancy dress ball of the town, organized yearly by the Society of Artists in the Globe Rooms. During these days I saw little of Hermann, but the day before the ball she paid me a brief visit. She came for her ticket, which I had got for her, and sat quietly with me for a while in my room. We fell into a conversation so remarkable that it made a deep impression on me. "You're really doing splendidly," she said. "Dancing suits you. Anyone who hadn't seen you for the last 4 weeks would scarcely know you." "Yes," I agreed. "Things haven't gone so well with me for years. That's all you're doing, Hermann." "Oh, not the beautiful Maria's?" "No. She is a present from you, like all the rest. She is wonderful." "She is just the girl you need, Steppenwolf. Pretty, young, light-hearted, an expert in love, and not to be had every day. If you hadn't to share her with others, if she weren't always merely a fleeting guest, it would be another matter. Yes, I had to concede this too. And so, have you really got everything you want now? No, Hermine, it is not like that. What I have got is very beautiful and delightful, a great pleasure, a great consolation. I'm really happy. Well then, what more do you want? I do want more. I am not content with being happy. I was not made for it. It is not my destiny. My destiny is the opposite. To be unhappy, in fact? Well, you've had that and to spare. That time when you couldn't go home because of the razor? No, Hermine, it is something else. That time, I grant you, I was very unhappy. But it was a stupid unhappiness that led to nothing. Why? Because I should not have had that fear of death when I wished for it all the same. The unhappiness that I need and long for is different. It is of the kind that will let me suffer with eagerness and lust after death. That is the unhappiness or happiness that I am waiting for. I understand that. There we are, brother and sister. But what have you got against the happiness that you have found now with Maria? Why aren't you content? I have nothing against it. Oh, no, I love it. I'm grateful for it. It is as lovely as a sunny day in a wet summer. But I suspect that it can't last. This happiness leads to nothing either. It gives content, but content is no food for me. It lulls the Steppenwolf to sleep and satiates him. But it is not a happiness to die for. So it's necessary to be dead, Steppenwolf? I think so, yes. My happiness fills me with content, and I can bear it for a long while yet. But sometimes, when happiness leaves a moment's leisure to look about me and long for things, the longing I have is not to keep this happiness forever, but to suffer once again, only more beautifully and less meanly than before. I long for the sufferings that make me ready and willing to die. Hermine looked tenderly in my eyes with that dark look that could so suddenly come into her face. Lovely, fearful eyes. Picking her words one by one and piecing them together and speaking slowly and so low that it was an effort to hear her, she said, I want to tell you something today, something that I have known for a long while, and you know it too, but perhaps you have never said it to yourself. I'm going to tell you now what it is that I know about you and me and our fate. You, Harry, have been an artist and a thinker, a man full of joy and faith, always on the track of what is great and eternal, never content with the trivial and petty. But the more life has awakened you and brought you back to yourself, the greater has your need been, and the deeper the sufferings and dread and despair that have overtaken you, till you were up to the neck in them. And all that you once knew and loved and revered as beautiful and sacred, all the belief you once had in mankind and our high destiny, has been of no avail, and has lost its worth and gone to pieces. Your faith found no more air to breathe, and suffocation is a hard death. Is that true, Harry? Is that your fate? I nodded again and again. You have a picture of life within you, a faith, a challenge, and you were ready for deeds and sufferings and sacrifices, and then you became aware by degrees that the world asked no deeds and no sacrifices of you whatever, and that life is no poem of heroism with heroic parts to play and so on, but a comfortable room where people are quite content with eating and drinking, coffee and knitting, cards and wireless, and whoever wants more and has got it in him, the heroic and the beautiful and the reverence for the great poets or for the saints, is a fool and a Don Quixote. Good. And it has been just the same for me, my friend. I was a gifted girl. I was meant to live up to a high standard, to expect much of myself and do great things. I could have played a great part. I could have been the wife of a king, the beloved of a revolutionary, the sister of a genius, the mother of a martyr. And life has allowed me just this, to be a courtesan of fairly good taste, and even that has been hard enough. That is how things have gone with me. For a while I was inconsolable, and for a long time I put the blame on myself. Life, thought I, must in the end be in the right, and if life scorned my beautiful dreams, so I argued, it was my dreams that were stupid and wrong-headed. But that did not help me at all. and as I had good eyes and ears and was a little inquisitive too, I took a good look at this so-called life and at my neighbors and acquaintances, 50 or so of them and their destinies, and then I saw you. And I knew that my dreams had been right 1,000 times over, just as yours had been. It was life and reality that were wrong. It was as little right that a woman like me should have no other choice than to grow old in poverty and in a senseless way at a typewriter in the pay of a money-maker, or to marry such a man for his money's sake, or to become some kind of drudge as for a man like you to be forced in his loneliness and despair to have recourse to a razor. Perhaps the trouble with me was more material and moral, and with you more spiritual, but it was the same road. Do you think I can't understand your horror of the foxtrot, your dislike of bars and dancing floors, your loathing of jazz music and the rest of it? I understand it only too well, and your dislike of politics as well, your despondence over the chatter and irrepressible antics of the parties and the press, your despair over the war, the one that has been and the one that is to be, over all that people nowadays think, read, and build, over the music they play, the celebrations they hold, the education they carry on. You are right, Steppenwolf, right 1,000 times over, and yet you must go to the wall. You are much too exacting and hungry for this simple, easy-going, and easily contented world of today. You have a dimension too many. Whoever wants to live and enjoy his life today must not be like you and me. Whoever wants music instead of noise, joy instead of pleasure, soul instead of gold, creative work instead of business, passion instead of foolery, finds no home in this trivial world of ours. She looked down and fell into meditation. Hermann, I cried tenderly, sister, how clearly you see, and yet you taught me the foxtrot. But how do you mean that people like us with a dimension too many cannot live here? What brings it about? Is it only so in our days, or was it so always? I don't know. For the hour of the world I will suppose it to be in our time only. A disease, a momentary misfortune. Our leaders strain every nerve, and with success to get the next war going, while the rest of us meanwhile dance the foxtrot, earn money, and eat pralines. In such a time the world must indeed cut a poor figure. Let us hope that other times were better, and will be better again, richer, broader, and deeper. But that is no help to us now, and perhaps it has always been the same. Always as it is today? Always a world only for politicians, profiteers, waiters, and pleasure-seekers, and not a breath of air for men? Well, I don't know. Nobody knows. Anyway, it is all the same. But I am thinking now of your favorite, of whom you have talked to me sometimes, and read me, too, some of his letters, of Mozart. How was it with him in his day, who controlled things in his times and ruled the roost and gave the tone and counted for something? Was it Mozart or the business people, Mozart or the average man? And in what fashion did he come to die and be buried? And perhaps, I mean, it has always been the same, and always will be, in what is called history at school, and all we learn by heart, there about heroes and geniuses and great deeds and fine emotions, is all nothing but a swindle invented by the schoolmasters for educational reasons to keep children occupied for a given number of years. It has always been so, and always will be. Time and the world, money and power belong to the same small people and the shallow people. To the rest, to the real men, belongs nothing. Nothing but death. Nothing else? Yes, eternity. You mean a name, and fame with posterity? No, Steppenwolf, not fame. Has that any value? And do you think that all true and real men have been famous and known to posterity? No, of course not. Then it isn't fame. Fame exists in that sense only for the schoolmasters. No, it isn't fame. It is what I call eternity. The pious call it the kingdom of God. I say to myself, all we who ask too much and have a dimension too many could not contrive to live at all if there were not another air to breathe outside the air of this world, if there were not eternity at the back of time, and this is the kingdom of truth. The music of Mozart belongs there, and the poetry of your great poets. The saints, too, belong there, who have worked wonders and suffered martyrdom and given a great example to men. But the image of every true act, the strength of every true feeling, belongs to eternity just as much. even though no one knows of it, or sees it, or records it, or hands it down to posterity. In eternity, there is no posterity." "You are right." "The pious," she went on meditatively, "after all, know most about this. That is why they set up the saints in what they call the communion of the saints. The saints, that is to say, the true men, the younger brothers of the Savior. We are with them all our lives long in every good deed, in every brave thought, in every love. The communion of the saints, in earlier times, it was set by painters in a golden heaven, shining, beautiful, and full of peace, and it is nothing else but what I meant a moment ago when I called it eternity. It is the kingdom on the other side of time and appearances. It is there we belong. There is our home. It is that which our heart strives for, and for that reason, Steppenwolf, we long for death. There you will find your Goethe again, and Novalis, and Mozart, and I my saints, Christopher, Philip of Neri, and all. There are many saints who at first were sinners. Even sin can be a way to saintliness, sin and vice. You will laugh at me, but I often think that even my friend Pablo might be a saint in hiding. Ah, Harry, we have to stumble through so much dirt and humbug before we reach home, and we have no one to guide us. Our only guide is our homesickness." With the last words her voice had sunk again, and now there was a stillness of peace in the room. The sun was setting. It lit up the gilt lettering on the back of my books. I took Hermine's head in my hands and kissed her on the forehead, and lent my cheek to hers as though she were my sister, and so we stayed for a moment. And so I should have liked best to stay and to have gone out no more that day. But Maria had promised me this night, the last before the great ball. But on my way to join Maria, I thought, not of her, but of what Hermine had said. It seemed to me that it was not, perhaps, her own thoughts, but mine. She had reached them like a clairvoyant, breathed them in, and given them back, so that they had a form of their own and came to me as something new. I was particularly thankful to her for having expressed the thought of eternity just at this time. I needed it, for without it I could not live, and neither could I die. The sacred sense of beyond, of timelessness, of a world which had an eternal value, and the substance of which was divine, had been given back to me today by this friend of mine who taught me dancing. I was forced to recall my dream of Goethe, and that vision of the old wiseacre when he laughed so inhumanly and played his joke on me in the fashion of the immortals. For the first time I understood Goethe's laughter, the laughter of the immortals. It was a laughter without an object. It was simply light and lucidity. It was that which is left over when a true man has passed through all the sufferings, vices, mistakes, passions, and misunderstandings of men, and got through to eternity in the world of space. And eternity was nothing else than the redemption of time, its return to innocence, so to say, and its transformation again into space. I went to meet Maria at the place where we usually dined. However, she had not arrived, and while I sat waiting at the table in the quiet and secluded restaurant, my thoughts still ran on the conversation I had had with Hermine. All these thoughts that had arisen between her and me seemed so intimate and well-known, fashioned from a mythology and an imagery so entirely my own. The immortals, living their life in timeless space, enraptured, refashioned, and immersed in a crystalline eternity like ether, and the cool starry brightness and radiant serenity of this world outside the earth. Whence was all this so intimately known? As I reflected, passages of Mozart's Cassations, of Bach's well-tempered clavier, came to my mind, and it seemed to me that all through this music there was the radiance of this cool starry brightness, and the quivering of this clearness of ether. Yes, it was there. In this music there was a feeling as of time frozen into space, and above it there quivered a never-ending and superhuman serenity, an eternal divine laughter. Yes, and how well the aged Goethe of my dreams fitted into. And suddenly I heard this fathomless laughter around me. I heard the immortals laughing. I sat entranced. Entranced, I felt for a pencil in my waistcoat pocket, and looking for paper saw the wine card lying on the table. I turned it over and wrote on the back. I wrote verses and forgot about them till one day I discovered them in my pocket. They ran: The immortals. Ever reeking from the vales of earth, ascends to us life's fevered surge, wealth's excess, the rage of dearth, smoke of death meals on the gallows' verge, greed without end, imprisoned air, murderers' hands, usurers' hands, hands of prayer. Exhales in fetid breath the human swarm, whipped on by fear and lust, blood raw, blood warm, breathing blessedness and savage heats, eating itself and spewing what it eats, hatching war and lovely art, decking out with idiot craze bawdy houses while they blaze through the childish fair-time mart, weltering to its own decay in the glare of pleasure's way, rising for each newborn and then sinking for each to dust again. But we above you, evermore residing in the ether's star translumined ice, know not day nor night nor time's dividing, where nor age nor sex for our device. All your sins and anguish self-affrighting, your murders and lascivious delighting, are to us but as a show, like the suns that circling go, changing not our day for night. On your frenzied life we spy, and refreshing ourselves thereafter, with the stars in order fleeing, our breath is winter in our sight. Fawns the dragon of the sky. Cool and unchanging is our eternal being. Cool and star-bright is our eternal laughter. Then Maria came, and after a cheerful meal I accompanied her to our little room. She was lovelier that evening, warmer and more intimate than she had ever been. The love she gave me was so tender that I felt it as the most complete abandon. "Maria," said I, "you are as prodigal today as a goddess. Don't kill us both quite. Tomorrow, after all, is the ball. Whom have you got for a cavalier tomorrow? I'm very much afraid it is a fairy prince who will carry you off, and I shall never see you any more. Your love tonight is almost like that of good lovers who bid each other farewell for the last time." She put her lips close to my ear and whispered, "Don't say that, Harry. Any time might be the last time. If Hermann takes you, you will come no more to me. Perhaps she will take you tomorrow." Never did I experience the feeling peculiar to those days, that strange, bittersweet alternation of mood, more powerfully than on that night before the ball. It was happiness that I experienced. There was the loveliness of Maria and her surrender. There was the sweet and subtle sensuous joy of inhaling and tasting 100 pleasures of the senses that I had only begun to know as an elderly man. I was bathed in sweet joy like a ripping pool, and yet that was only the shell. Within all was significant and tense with fate, and while, love-lost and tender, I was busied with the little sweet appealing things of love, and sank apparently without a care in the caress of happiness, I was conscious all the while in my heart how my fate raced on at breakneck speed, racing and chasing like a frightened horse, straight for the precipitous abyss, spurred on by dread and longing to the consummation of death. Just as a short while before I had started aside in fear from the easy thoughtless pleasure of merely sensual love, and felt a dread of Maria's beauty that laughingly offered itself, so now I felt a dread of death, a dread, however, that was already conscious of its approaching change into surrender and release. Even while we were lost in the silent and deep preoccupation of our love, and belonged more closely than ever we had to one another, my soul bid adieu to Maria, and leave of all that she had meant to me. I had learnt from her, once more before the end, to confide myself like a child to life's surface play, to pursue a fleeting joy, and to be both child and beast in the innocence of sex, a state that, in earlier life, I had only known rarely and as an exception. The life of the senses and of sex had nearly always had for me the bitter accompaniment of guilt, the sweet but dread taste of forbidden fruit that puts a spiritual man on his guard. Now, Hermann and Maria had shown me this garden in its innocence, and I had been a guest there, and thankfully. But it would soon be time to go on further. It was too agreeable and too warm in this garden. It was my destiny to make another bid for the crown of life in the expiation of its endless guilt. An easy life, an easy love, an easy death. These were not for me. From what the girls told me, I gathered that for the ball next day, or, in connection with it, quite unusual delights and extravagances were on foot. Perhaps it was the climax, and perhaps Maria's suspicion was correct. Perhaps this was our last night together, and perhaps the morning would bring a new unwinding of fate. I was aflame with longing and breathless with dread. I clung wildly to Maria, and there flared within me a last burst of wild desire. End of section 5.